Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea. Welcome. I'm happy to have you here in the pantry with me today to talk about the amount of money that I save canning my own food. In my last video, we went into my store-bought pantry, which is just over here, right back there, and we talked about my top 10 staples and the amount of money that I save buying in bulk. So today I wanted to dig into canned food and do a little bit of deep diving into the cost savings home canning your own food. I will say that whether or not I saved a ton of money canning, I would probably do it anyway. Canning is something that kind of runs in my veins. My grandma canned, my mom canned. My mom taught me how to can when I was very young. One of my first memories in the kitchen with my mom is canning peaches and her excitement of the pinging of the jars when they were sealing on the counter. I started canning independently when I was in my early 20s, and I've been canning consistently ever since. And at this point, I can between 1,000 and 1,500 jars, depending on how many good bumper crops I have in a year. And so canning is something that I would do anyway. I'm really passionate about it. I've been teaching about canning here on my channel for years, and I absolutely love it. And the other thing that I love to do and I'm really passionate about is gardening. And so those two loves definitely marry well because I produce a lot of food in my garden, and a lot of that food you can see now in these jars. There's so many aspects of canning that I love. I love the process of growing the food and then harvesting that food and getting that prepared and putting it in jars. That whole process I really enjoy, even though I'll admit it is a lot of work. I love the aesthetic of beautiful, sparkling, colorful jars on my pantry shelves. I just think it's just the most beautiful thing. What I really appreciate about home canned food is that I know exactly what's in every single one of these jars. There's no mystery ingredients that I can't read, that I can't comprehend what they do to my body. I know every single ingredient. There's simple ingredients in here. And also all of the food that is homegrown here is organic. And while I might not be able to afford to buy canned organic food because it's really expensive, I grow everything organically. So I know that the majority of this food is organic. There are a few exceptions, one of them being the peaches, but we'll get into that when we get over to the peaches. But other than that, pretty much all the ingredients that I use are organic, and that feels really good. And knowing that there's no mystery ingredients in there gives me a really deep sense of peace about the food that I'm feeding my family. The last thing about it is that having food stored like this is around a year's worth of canned goods for our family. There are some things in here that are going to last us for 2 years, and I'll talk about that when I get there as well. But this should last us for around a year. That's what I try to do. So from the time they hit the shelves, I try to make sure that I preserve enough to last us all the way through until I have that product to can again the following year. And that gives me a little bit of food security, knowing that I have these ingredients on my shelves that I can use to make food for my family. Okay, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the cost savings. I'm going to go through around 10 items that I think are probably fairly common. So rather than digging into some of the fancier stuff I make, like orange mango mint jelly and things like that, I will stick more to things like peaches and pickles and canned beans and things that I think most people are probably currently buying at the grocery store. And I'm going to share with you how much you can save if you learned how to can. And I know canning can be a little bit intimidating when you first start getting into it, but once you learn, and this goes for pretty much anything in life, once you learn the basics of it and how to do it safely, it is not that complicated at all. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to say before I share these prices is that we're in Canada, so the prices are in Canadian dollars, so you'll have to do the conversions there depending on where you're hailing from. The other thing is that these are approximations. I tried to keep it fairly close to what I believed would be the average across the board as far as savings, but there are so many variables, whether you're growing the food yourself, for instance, whether you're purchasing it from a higher end farmer's market, whether you're purchasing the ingredients from the grocery store, all of those things are going to could add a very significant price difference to the prices I'm going to share with you. Let's talk about the equipment that you need for canning to start. And this is usually a one-time cost outside of the lids, which do need to be replaced unless you're using Tatler lids, which are reusable lids. These lids themselves actually need to be replaced every time. But outside of that, the jars, the canner, and the rings are a one-time purchase. So when you first start canning, the upfront costs can feel very high. The one thing I want you to keep in mind when you purchase these is that these are going to be things that are going to overall, over the lifespan of your canning journey, are going to save you a ton of money. Canning jars have gone up. They've almost doubled since 2020. So they can be fairly expensive. So for a dozen quart jars, it can be between $20 and $25, whereas pint jars are usually around $15. Lids can range anywhere between $1 and $1.50 each. And then rings, when you buy your canning jars, they will come with lids and rings. So the first time you'll be able to just use the lids and rings that are on your jars. The lids, again, you'll have to replace, but the rings you'll be able to use over and over for years. So I just store mine on a string like this. So the upfront cost is going to be anywhere between $50 and $75 when it comes to jars, rings, and lids. So that'll be just for your first batch. Again, the jars and the rings will be able to be reused for your consecutive batches, and you'll have to buy new lids. My jars, I have a large collection of canning jars that I have been collecting for years and years and years. Or have been well paid for many years ago. I usually do buy probably, I would say, up to 4 cases of new jars every year to replace jars that have cracked and broken. And sometimes, like last year where I did a lot more canning than I had in previous years, I did have to buy some more jars. But for the most part, my jars were paid for many, many years ago. And then we have canners, and this is a pressure canner here. So we're not going to get into the details of canning itself in today's video, but pressure canners, if you're wanting to do things like beans and meat, soups, things like that, you need to use a pressure canner. So anything that is a low acid food, pressure canning is required. And pressure canners can run anywhere between 200. I think sometimes you can get them for a little bit less, especially if you're shopping around secondhand for them. You can get them between 200 and then they can go all the way up to $1,000 or more dollars, depending on the type of canner that you're buying. But it is not necessary when you are just starting to get into canning to spend a ton of money on a canner. In fact, I would recommend water bath canning as the best way to start canning. And honestly, when it comes to water bath canning, you can just use a large stock pot. So if you have a stock pot in your kitchen, you can use that for canning. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of canning itself, but you can just start with a stock pot. So that means that the price could be $0 as far as a canner if you have a stock pot. For a water bath canner, you can get them for around $50, between $50 and $100, and they will last you forever. That's one thing about canning products is generally they're fairly well made, and they should last you a lifetime if they're taken care of properly. So again, once you've made those initial purchases, they are done. And you can, if you really wanted to get into it, you could divide the cost of that canner out over all the jars you're going to make with that canner and then add, a fraction of a cent on to each jar of food. But I'm not going to do that today. So keep that in mind when I'm sharing these prices, that I'm not talking about the price that the price that I paid for my canners initially. Now let's get into the products themselves. We're going to start with, let's start with jam, since I have a jar of jam sitting right here. So this is what is this one? This is a pear jam. You can see that there. So these pears I purchased for around $1 a pound. And on average, when it comes to the amount of fruit that you can fit in a jar, that will vary a little bit, but it's around 2.5 pounds, 2 to 2.5 pounds of fruit that you're going to need for a quart jar. So that's what this is here. This is a quart jar. And so half of that, so around a pound or so for the food here. And on average, for most of the store-bought fruit that I have here, so the pears I purchased, the peaches I purchased, and some of the tomatoes I purchased, they ranged between 65, and that's a really good deal, so 65 cents a pound, up to around $1.50 a pound, and sometimes even up to $2 a pound, depending on how the fruit season went. But let's just say $1.50 per pound. We'll just use that as an average across the board. So because I said we can fit around a pound of fruit in a pint jar, it's $1.50 worth of fruit in this jar. So a pint of jam in the grocery store, which is around 16 ounces of jam, is going to run you between $5 and $10, depending on whether it's organic or not, the ingredients, whether it's a fancy jam with several different ingredients in it, or whether it's just a straight up raspberry jam. So it's going to be between $5 and and $10. Again, remember that these are Canadian prices, so that it's going to seem a lot more than what you're paying in the United States, just because our dollar is fairly low right now. I think it's around 71 cents to the American dollar. So that's approximate. So if we guess here that we used around a pound or so, maybe a little bit more of the fruit, and we're going to say that was $1.50 worth of fruit in here, and then $1.50 for the lid. I do buy my lids in bulk, so they are a little bit cheaper for me than that. Then we're looking at around $3. If we wanted to add in the price of the sugar and the seasonings that I used in here, let's say it's an extra dollar worth of other ingredients that I have in this jar. So that's going to bring this jar up to $4 is what it cost me to make. So compared to grocery store, I saved between $1 and $4 to $5, depending on the kind of jam it is, compared to grocery store. And then also, of course, there's that added benefit of knowing exactly what is in this jar. So that is if I purchased the ingredient, which in the case of these pears, I did purchase. So let's say it's a strawberry rhubarb jam, which is what this one is, and I grew the strawberries and grew the rhubarb. Then for that quart jar, it cost me $1.50 for the price of the lid, and nothing for the strawberries, the raspberries, and the jar itself, because I already owned those. I've already put in that investment up front. If I really wanted to get carried away, I could go break down the original price of that, say, strawberry plant, for instance, or let's say it took 4 strawberry plants and those strawberry plants cost me 50 cents each, and then I divided it out. It would still be negligible. It would be 0.002 cents for divided over the last 7 years or whatever it would be. So let's just call the fruit that I'm growing and the vegetables I'm growing pretty much free, because they are at this point. So that means that jar I actually would have saved upwards of, depending on the kind of jam it is, for a quart jar, I could be saving upwards of $8 to $10 on canning it myself, which is obviously hugely significant savings and 100% worth it. Okay, let's do tomatoes now, because I think tomato products are something that most of us use. I can hundreds and hundreds of jars of tomatoes every year. I do grow a lot of tomatoes. I grow around 168 tomato plants per year, but I also do purchase some tomatoes because I can't, in the north here with my high tunnel, I can't grow enough tomatoes to actually make sure that it's covering all our tomato needs for an entire year. So these are some of the tomatoes that I grow and can. This is a Manitoba tomato, which is a great northern growing tomato. And this package was $3.49, and there's 25 tomato seeds in here, and they have 98% germination. So that means if I plant all of these seeds, 98% of them are going to come up. And I have found that to be the case when it comes to West Coast Seeds tomatoes. They do tend to have really great germination rates. So each of these tomato seeds are going to grow a ton of tomatoes. Each seed only costs a fraction of a cent per seed. And I'm going to get pounds and pounds of tomatoes off of that one. So we can say that the cost of the tomatoes themselves, as far as monetary cost, are going to be very, very low. Now, I'm not including the cost of my time. And growing all of this food is incredibly time consuming, but because it brings me so much joy, I don't really count that. And I just feel like there's so many benefits to gardening and being outdoors and having your hands in the dirt and partnering with nature to grow these gorgeous plants. I feel like it's the cost of my time is also negligible. So outside of the cost of the lid at $1.50, which is on the high side, like I said, this jar of tomatoes is pretty much free. And these are also organic as well. So if I were to buy a quart of organic tomato sauce from the grocery store, okay, so for a 16-ounce jar of organic tomato sauce, so just basic tomato sauce without anything in it, it is somewhere around $10 for 16 ounces. Is that right, friends? You guys are going to have to tell me. I have not purchased store-bought tomato sauce in probably 20 years. So is that true? That is so expensive. Oh my gosh. So this is twice that much. So this feels like gold to me now all of a sudden. That is insane. What? So like I said, this costs me the $1.50 for the lid because I own the jar and I grew the tomatoes and I grew the onions and the garlic and everything else that's in there, even the herbs that are in here. So would a quart jar of tomato sauce at the grocery store cost like $15 to $20, depending on where you're getting it from? So that is absolutely outrageous, like mind-blowing to me. So canning tomatoes, if you can grow your own tomatoes. Okay, so I'll just quickly add in tomatoes here, if we buy them in bulk, non-organic tomatoes, but grown without chemicals, they're just not certified organic, are between 80 and $1.50, so 80 cents to $1.50 per pound. And on average, you can fit between 2 to 3 pounds of tomatoes in a jar like this. So let's say that we have, even if we wanted to go on the high end, we had $6 worth of actual product in here, like tomatoes, garlic, onions, all that kind of stuff. And let's say that they're organic, so we'll go at that $6 around. We're still saving a significant amount of money on this quart of tomatoes, even if we're purchasing all the ingredients for it. So can yourself some tomatoes, friends, please. If you do nothing else, make yourself some spaghetti sauce because the savings are so worth it. And not only that, the flavor is amazing. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I would do this whether I saved a ton of money or not. So I haven't really spent a ton of time doing kind of crunching the numbers for the savings on all of these products, but I have to admit that by doing this, it is making me even more excited to teach more people how to can, to can more myself, because the savings can be really significant. So now let's look at a jar of, these are bread and butter pickles that I made. So I had a bumper crop of pickles this year, of cucumbers. It was just insane. They just kept coming and coming and coming. And I have so many jars of pickles left on my shelf right now that I might not even need to can pickles this next year. So that'll be 2 years worth of pickles, and a package of pickle seeds, or I keep saying pickles, cucumber seeds are around that $3.50 mark, and there's usually 25 to 50 seeds. So one plant is going to produce enough pickles for most people to make many pints of pickling or of bread and butter pickles, or whatever the kind of pickle you want to make. We have spring water here, so we don't have a water bill. So you might want to include the extra cost of the extra water. I don't know how that works in the city. I've never had to pay for water before, so I have no idea whether that cost would be significant or not. You'll have to tell me if you do have to pay for your water. If you were watering a garden, would it increase your water bill significantly over a month? Keep in mind, you need around 1 inch depth of water per week in order to grow plants well. And that's if you live in an environment where you're getting some rain. If you're in a really dry climate, then you need to water even more. So that's something I've never really had to consider. But so the product in here, I have some onions in here and pickling cucumbers, and then vinegar, pickling vinegar. So the product outside of the vinegar was free for me. And then the vinegar itself, I'll show you. I buy my vinegar in bulk, and I buy cases of this pickling vinegar. And for most of my recipes, it's half water, half vinegar. So I'm using, this carries 4 cups of liquid if there's nothing else in it. So let's call it 1.5 cups of liquid, maybe 2 cups of liquid with the product in there as well. So maybe a cup of vinegar per quart. So a jug like this is $4.50. There's 16 cups of vinegar in here. And like I said, I use around 1 cup of vinegar per quart. So that's 16 quarts of pickles that I can get out of 1 jug of pickling vinegar. The cost is negligible for 16 quarts. It's a couple of cents, even under, I think a couple of cents, if I'm doing my math right, which I'm probably not, per jar of pickles. Let's call it $1.54 or so that it costs me for a quart of pickles. The prices vary quite wildly when it comes to bread and butter pickles. So for a quart of organic bread and butter pickles, it was between $12 and $15. For a quart of just regular grocery store brand pickles, it was around $8 or so for a quart. So again, crazy amount of savings. I seriously feel like I have like a gold vault back here with all of this food because it's worth a fortune if I were to have to go replace this at the grocery store. So that's really fantastic. That's making me feel really good. One of the other things that I buy, because we can't grow soft skinned fruits here in the north, so peaches, I order these usually from farms that are around 3.5 to 4 hours south of us. The peaches that we got this year were actually imported from Georgia. So these were Georgia peaches, and my friends, these were the best peaches I've ever had. They were so good. But the reason for that is because we lost all of our stone fruit here in British Columbia last winter because of, I think there was a freeze that happened at the wrong time. So we had, I think it was an 85% loss. So in order to get peaches, we had them imported up from Georgia. These were somewhere around $2 a pound, which was fairly expensive, but 100% worth it because they were so good. These are not organic peaches, so these are just standard run-of-the-mill commercial peaches. And I can fit between 2 and 3 pounds, depending on how much I want to pack them in here, of peaches per jar. So it's around $6 per jar for the product. And because these were such sweet peaches, I actually just filled them with water. So it's just the cost of the peaches. So let's call it $6 per quart. So the prices for store-bought peaches are just very wildly, as far as I was able to find, anywhere between $5 and $10 for a quart of peaches, and then in some cases even more expensive. Overall, I think the savings that I save home canning, I actually probably spend on the drive down to get the peaches. So I don't think I save a ton, although the flavor of these and just knowing what's in the jar and all the things makes it worth it for me. All right, what should we dig into next? Let's do some canned beans next, which never look really beautiful in a jar. I guess if I cleaned this jar up a little bit, it would probably look a little bit better, but canned beans are not the most attractive. Canned good. However, they are super cheap. So I buy my beans in 25-pound bags, and to buy organic beans like that, it can range anywhere between $50 and $75 for 25 pounds of beans. On average, I fit between 3/4 and a pound of beans per jar. So on average, I'm going to get between 30 and 40 quarts, depending on whether I'm adding any extra ingredients. And that is out of that 25-pound bag of dried beans. And that is going to run us at around the $2 mark or so for a quart of beans. So obviously the savings are pretty significant there because these are organic beans. So if you're going to buy an actual entire quart, I don't even know if they sell quarts of beans. They're probably more like the 16-ounce size of beans. An organic can of those is going to run you anywhere between $5 and $8 a quart. So that is, I mean, there's just no comparison, friends. There's just no comparison. So cheap. Canning beans are one of the things that, because you do have to pressure can beans, that I always recommend that people start with if beans are something that they eat regularly, because it's really easy to pressure can beans. And relatively speaking, they're a really cheap legume that you can, which I just think is so awesome. Okay, I don't even know if it's even necessary for me to go through too many more of these products and break them all down as far as the cost savings go, because it's a lot. It's basically, I feel like I could just have started this video saying you will save between $2 and $10 per quart by canning. Now go learn how to can. That's how I feel at this moment. Anyway, okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is, let's do something a little bit fancier just for fun. Let's look at some French onion soup. So this is canned onions with some garlic and beef broth. That's what I have used for this. So we raise our own beef, so I make my own beef broth. Raising our beef is fairly inexpensive for us because we grow our own hay as well. So I think it's been 4 or 5 years since we've actually purchased cows, because we just raise up the offspring and either convert those into milk cows or into beef. So the beef itself costs us very, very little at this point. And then the onions I grow myself, and I actually have my onions started for this year. Those are some little baby onions that just just came up. Did we plant these together? I can't remember if we did or if I did it over in my membership. But either way, little baby onions. This is going to be future French onion soup because I love canning French onion soup. So the onions themselves are free for me. The beef broth is also fairly inexpensive because of what I just explained. And then the garlic I also grow. So my French onion soup, free for the product, free for the jar, and $1.50 for the lid. So you can't beat that. I'm not even going to bother looking up the price of buying it at the grocery store because there's no way that it can compare with home canned. So even if you were to, say, grow some of your own onions, and onions are fairly easy to grow, you can even grow them in buckets out on your deck. You could grow them in a green stalk planter. You could grow them in a small plot in a community garden or in a small plot in your backyard. And then you made your own French onion soup. I use this as a base for a lot of soups I make during the winter. I use it as a base for a lot of my gravies, and I also use it to cook pot roast in. So it's very diverse. And then, of course, just as French onion soup itself. Onions are one of those vegetables that are relatively inexpensive to buy, even just from the grocery store. You could buy a big 10-pound bag of onions and can yourself up a whole bunch of quarts of French onion soup. Or from your local farmer's market. Onions are one of those things. Definitely recommend canning. So I'm going to run through the next couple of things I'm going to share with you are ingredients that you could buy just from your local grocery store. So let's say you don't have access to a farmer's market, you don't have access to a local farm or even a local gardener to get these things. These are things that you can actually buy from your local grocery store and then bring them home and preserve. Potatoes being one of them. They do require a pressure canner, so that's something just to know up front. Whereas what I've showed you before, the pickles and the jams, they don't require a pressure canner, but the beans and the potatoes do. So potatoes are relatively cheap to buy from the grocery store. And because you're going to be peeling them, you don't have to worry as much about if you can't afford to buy organic potatoes. Potatoes I throw into soup, I throw into stew. I can open a jar of these up, rinse them off really well, and roast them in the oven for roasted potatoes, or I can fry them on the stove for fried potatoes. And they are fantastic, super easy to use. And it's so nice to not have to peel potatoes and cook potatoes to be able to use potatoes. So I love having some canned potatoes on the shelf. So another one that would be similar to the potatoes as far as really economical is squash. You can see all the squash that I have on my pantry floor here. These are actually squash that I harvested in the fall, and they're still going strong. Squash will last a good long while as long as they're kept in a cool, you don't want it to be too cold because that actually causes them to degrade faster, but just a cool, dark environment. They will last you most of the winter. So even if you don't have time to process them right away, you could buy them when they're cheap in the fall and then process them in the wintertime. If you are wanting to make a puree, like you would buy a canned pumpkin puree at the grocery store, then you do want to puree that and freeze it. It's not recommended to can pureed squash because of the lack of consistent density in different squashes. They haven't been able to come up with a safe time for canning squash where the heat can penetrate evenly all the way through the product. So it is recommended to cut them up into cubes like this. So this isn't my favorite way to eat squash. I much prefer it freshly roasted or roasted and then pureed and used. But it is a great way to store squash over the long run. And there has been a few years where I haven't had really great squash harvests, or my squash had too much moisture in the late fall and ended up with some mold and I needed to preserve them right away. But you can drain it out and throw this in soup. I make squash soup with canned squash. You can use them in like breads and muffins and things like that. But because squash are so cheap to buy in the fall, the cost for canning a product like this is going to be negligible per jar. So maybe a total of maybe $1, I don't know, $1.75 probably or so, give or take, for a jar of canned squash. Okay, so let's dig into pie filling. Pie filling is one that you are going to save a fortune on if you are canning it. Because number one, apples are really inexpensive. And again, if you buy things in season, so you're buying your apples in the fall, you can buy apples in bulk even from local grocery stores for a pretty good price. So the biggest reason that I can my own pie filling is because store-bought pie filling is so full of ingredients that I don't want to consume. One of them being like high fructose corn syrup, cornstarch, all of these ingredients that I just don't really want to be consuming large amounts of. I make my pie filling with a sugar syrup, and then I just add my organic cornstarch to it when I want to actually add it to a product. And that just makes it really easy and really cheap to can. I do grow my own apples. Now my apple trees are around 6 years old and they're starting to produce really well for me. So this is pretty much free for me besides the little bit of sugar that I use and the cost of the lid. So that's fantastic. But if you're buying your apples and you buy them in bulk in the fall, when they're in season, you can usually find really good deals. So make 50 to 60 cents a pound for apples, and you're going to be able to fit a couple of pounds, usually between, like I said, 2 to 3 pounds of fruit per jar. So you're not only going to save money when you're canning your own pie filling, because you will save at least a few dollars per jar, but more than that, you're going to be able to control the ingredients that go into your pie filling, and it tastes so much better, and it's not filled with all that junk. So definitely a recommend. I just want to go through all my canned products now and just look at the savings for my own curiosity because it's kind of fun. But I'm going to do, I think I'll do 2 more ones that I just think would be something that you might want to consider because they're so inexpensive. And one would be canned coleslaw. So this is basically just cabbage, which is super cheap. All year round, but especially when it's in season, it's super cheap. There's some vinegar in here, some grated carrots in here. So I grew these. So again, this is pretty much free for me. And then some seasonings. But because if you buy one big cabbage and you chop that cabbage up, just one cabbage, you could probably get 6 quarts, maybe even 7 or 8 quarts, depending on the size of the cabbage, of canned coleslaw. And what I do with this, it also has a little bit of sugar in it too, I should mention. But what I do with this is I drain it out and then I just make coleslaw like I normally would, or I drain it out and we use it on pork tacos, which is really delicious. This is just a really fun one to have on the shelves and super inexpensive. And then last up, I want to talk about canned chicken. So again, another product that doesn't look as beautiful as some of the other ones too. Like for instance, what's another one that looks gorgeous? Like that. Like, look at those beautiful pickles with the garlic and the dill in the bottom. So pretty, but this one definitely doesn't look as pretty. However, we save a fair bit of money. So we do raise our own chicken here on our farm, and it costs us around $7 or so a bird to raise all the way from a chick. So that includes the price of buying the chick and then raising it all the way up till it's old enough to butcher. Our chickens, we don't raise organically. We're hoping to this year, but organic feed up here is so expensive, but we do pasture raise them. So they are out on pasture. So they're not eating as much of the commercial feed as they would be if they were contained. Let's call them pasture raised. They're not organic, but they're pasture raised. So pasture raised chickens tend to cost quite a bit more. Buying a whole chicken in our grocery store for buying a pasture raised chicken can cost up to $20 for a pasture-raised chicken and sometimes even more. Meat right now is incredibly expensive, chicken being one of the more expensive. And I just realized this is actually turkey, not chicken, but we're going to pretend it's chicken for the purpose of this. And on average, I can fit around 2 pounds or so, sometimes a little bit more, of chicken per container or per quart. And I like to raise my chickens. I raise them huge. They're massive by the time we butcher them, and I like doing it that way. I much prefer butchering larger chickens, but I just get so much more meat off them. And because we're pasture raising, our overall feed costs stay pretty low. And I get like around 10 pounds probably of meat off of one chicken that I raise. And so that is going to give me around 4 to 5 quarts of chicken per bird. I know how these birds were raised. I butchered them myself. I feel really good about that whole process. I know I do it as ethically as possible. I also know the feed that's going into them and all of those kinds of things. And that is a huge, huge consideration for me when I'm consuming meat, is I want to make sure all of those check boxes are checked. And this jar of canned meat, I know checks all those boxes. Whereas if I were to go buy the canned meat from the grocery store, there would probably be a lot of questions I couldn't even answer about how it was raised and how it was butchered and all of that kind of stuff, or the kind of feed that went into it. So I feel 100% good, even if I had no savings here, which I do obviously have a lot of savings here. I would do this anyway for all of those reasons that I mentioned. Normally, when you buy your chicken at the grocery store, it comes in a 5-ounce tin, and that usually runs around $4 for a tin of canned chicken. So this at the grocery store at around 30 ounces or so would cost between $24 and $26 of canned chicken. So significant savings, even with all the work that's involved in raising them and butchering them. It is 100% worth it for us to raise and can our own chicken. Or turkey, like this one. Savings are even more with turkey. Okay, friends, I think that is where I'm going to stop today's video. I could obviously talk about this subject all day long, and I'm finding this really interesting myself, and I hope you did too. But more than that, I hope that I encouraged you to explore learning how to can. And if you want to dig a little bit more deeply, I do have a canning playlist, and I'll be talking about canning all throughout the summer and the fall. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, consider subscribing, and then you can learn all that stuff. And if you'd like to even dig deeper than that, I do have a membership community that you can join, and we talk about canning all the time. We dig into the details of it. And if you have any questions as you're learning how to can, you can ask those within the community. I hope that you enjoyed today's video, everyone, as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.